Joining us live from our DD India studios, tracking the story very, very closely. Amrit, over to you. The significance of this visit, the deliverables that are on the agenda for both sides, and the timings and the intent. Very, very important.
That's right. There are various aspects to the visit of Prime Minister Modi to Ukraine. One, there is, of course, as you said, the timing is important. The war has been raging for about 2.5 years when it began in February 2022, and it rages on. So given the fact that the Prime Minister takes this first ever visit by an Indian Prime Minister to Kyiv or to Ukraine after it became a country in 1991 on the dissolution of Soviet Union, symbolizes that this the message of peace that India wishes to send across to both the Russian capital and the Ukrainians, and also to the rest of the world, that it is imperative that peace, a peaceful solution which is just and long-lasting, be brought with immediate effect. The second is, of course, the bilateral aspect of the relationship, how to take that forward. And third, as India assumes an unsaid presidency or leadership of the global south, Prime Minister Modi, during his talks with President Zelensky, would put forward that why it is important to strengthen networks, immediately put an end to the war through peace, through dialogue and diplomacy, and not through military victory, because military victory, one, is not in sight, and secondly, it is not a desirable solution in itself, because that does not provide any solutions. So the most vulnerable of the world, where 2/3 of the world's population resides, that's the global south, are getting involved and are bearing the consequences of a conflict which is not of their own making. Therefore, from the point of view of humanity, of those whose making this war is not, are suffering the consequences of it. Your own children are dying. Children are dying on both sides.
Yes.
The Prime Minister's visit to this martyrological exposition symbolizes exactly that.
Yes.
Sakal.
Yes, and also, the first engagement there paying floral tributes at the statue of Mahatma Gandhi, who has been a global messenger from India for the world peace by and large. But Amrit, also, since you've followed this so closely in Russia and Ukraine, and we've seen in the last few months or so, there has been a very concerted effort by the Indian establishment to tap the Eastern and Central Europe as far as strategic ties and Indian diplomacy is concerned. There is a clear shift, a very nuanced shift there.
Yes, it is. I mean, if you look at India's relationship, India's foreign policy, the focus has been essentially or traditionally been on Western Europe. There is a slow shift taking place as India rises in its stature globally. Its heft increases. It realizes engaging with different parts of the world is important. As Prime Minister yesterday in Poland said, that India's earlier policy was of non-alignment, equidistance from everybody. Now there's a shift, that the engagement with all. So the Prime Minister, or this government, especially in its foreign policy, which has been changing over a period of time, the need for engagement with all corners of the world, not just with the past that be, because the world dynamic is changing, the power dynamic is changing, and if also needs to change and push for the pace of that change to be accelerated. So there is indeed a shift, and we see that, and that is an integral part of the engagement with Eastern European countries.
Engagement with Eastern European countries, or also the outreach by some of the Eastern European countries to India. We know that for sure that, you had your Ukrainian foreign minister here in India, in Delhi, and then this visit comes on the invitation of President Zelensky, and it coincides with their Independence Day in the war-torn Ukraine. So for Ukraine, what makes this very, very essential and significant?
For Ukraine, it's important that a player of the significance of India and which has been an important voice of reason be engaged with. Prime Minister has been consistently speaking with President Zelensky over the phone. He's met him. The last he met him was in Italy on the sidelines of the G7 summit, where both Prime Minister Modi and President Zelensky were invited. They had a one-on-one meeting. There has been a constant engagement. Also, it's important, India's importance in this whole dynamic becomes important because it's one of the few countries which, with this sort of a diplomatic or political heft, that has a foot in both doors. India talks to both sides. Prime Minister was in Russia about 6 weeks back. So, here India, does some straight talking, tells both sides that the cost, the humanitarian cost of this war is far too much when weighed or compared with what you may achieve. While India commits itself to principles of, the UN Charter, the respect for sovereignty, for territorial integrity, and therefore advocates finding a lasting and a peaceful solution based on principles of justice. But India, and which is in keeping with the UN Charter, but India also, put stress on that the humanitarian cost, the loss of innocent lives, the consequences being borne by those who are not directly involved in it due to food insecurity, due to energy insecurity, who've been brought to the brink of starvation because of this raging war. And India talks to both sides. Therefore, President Zelensky would be very interested in listening to what Prime Minister Modi has to say because he hears the other side as well, and has a perspective on how both sides look at the problem. Say, for example, the Russians will not be interested in talking to the West or the American president, but they'd be interested in hosting the Indian Prime Minister, while they know very well that the Indian Prime Minister met the Ukrainian president on the sidelines of G7, but or the West realizes that you buying oil during the conflict, though they kept finger pointing at you that you may be funding the war in a certain way by buying Russian oil, but they had to come around and see that why it is important for energy security.
Right.
Because that oil wasn't just being brought into India, but from India it was going on back to Europe, which was itself battling energy crisis.
Yes.
Sakal.
Besides other points, you've raised a very, very important point there, the last one. Well, India speaks, the world listens. And here, Amrit, I would request you if you could just stay with us in the discussion. Very important to welcome also Lieutenant General Sanjay Kulkarni.